Aha. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of backtrack because I noticed that for some reason my mic was muted. All right, so I'm Dr. Maisha, founder of the Mind ReMapping Academy, and I hope everyone's had a good start to their week. Last week, I talked about in my last live stream, the last um, episode that we talked about communication and how everything is communication, and specifically how we often miss parts of communication because only 7% of communication is represented in our words. And so we talked about how, the 93% of language that we're often missing is in our tone of voice and our facial expressions and our body language. And I just gave some tips around now going back into life and noticing and being observant of people's communication beyond the words. Now, just because communication words are only 7% of our communication, it doesn't negate the importance of how we utilize and how we listen to the words that we're speaking and that others are speaking. And it's actually very important because a lot of, even in that 7%, there is a lot that gets missed. And I talk about this a lot when I do trainings. I talked about it in my TEDx talk. The reason that happens is because we are managing so much information on a second by second basis, 11 million bits of information per second to be exact, that our brain has to do some work to filter that out. And it has to chunk it into these chunks. And some people have big chunks and some people have smaller chunks, but it has to chunk it into information so that our brain can actually handle and sort through all that information. And so what that ends up doing is it causes us to filter the words, filter the through our past experience, through our language, through our environment, through our memories, our values, our beliefs. We filter all of that information, and we miss things. However, the other part of that is it also filters our speaking. And because some people operate when they sort information, when they're filtering information, they're filtering it into big chunks, and some people are filtering it into smaller chunks. People speak that way. So when you're speaking and when other people are speaking to you, excuse me, when other people are speaking to you, they're often leaving out important information and sometimes making associations that are inaccurate, untrue, or not based on evidence. And sometimes they're overgeneralizing. And so those are the three things that I'm going to sort of talk about briefly of why there are so many missed communications in that 7%. So we talked about last time, and if you haven't seen the last time, you can find it on my YouTube. You can, if you're here on LinkedIn with me, you can just go back into the feed and find that, and I can repost that. If you're on Instagram, I will repost that video as well. But we've already talked about why we miss the 93%, right? Because we're not even looking for it. We're not even aware of it oftentimes. We're unconscious of that. And then when you start to actually be conscious of it, you start to see things like as you're speaking, you see people's like facial expressions and their reactions and their body language change. And you begin to see that. And you're like, oh, there's more of the communication, or as you're communicating, and you are noticing the muscles in your face move, and you're noticing your own body language as you lean in and lean out and doing all of those types of things, then you're noticing in yourself, oh, this is how I communicate. Now, the words themselves, if you are a person who tends to um, like the big picture of things. You're a person who, when you're presented with an opportunity, with a project, with information in general, you not like to know the big picture. It often sounds like, what's the point of all this? Why? What is the point? What is the purpose of all this? Then it's possible that when you're speaking, you may speak more generally. You may speak in what we call higher chunk, um, and you may generalize things, tend to generalize things more and leave out details. If you're a person who has had, who likes detailed details, you actually may speak a lot of details, and there's the possibility of assigning meaning, and everyone I think does this to an extent, and we have to just be mindful of what we're assigning meaning to things that don't necessarily equal. So for example, just a very high level example is when someone looks at you a certain way. Let's say a person smiles at you, and that person smiling at you means that they like you. I mean, that's just an association that we make. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes that's it's not true, right? The thing about that is we make these kinds of associations with things that people say to us all the time or don't say. And we speak in these types of generalizations and deletions as well, and these types of associations as well. The other thing we tend to do is we tend to speak in cause and effect. So this happens, and that means that this is going to happen. Now, how does this relate to the missed communication? Because we speak in these equivalents and these cause and effects and these generalizations, but it's not obvious to the person listening to us that we're making these associations. We just say what we say, and it's not obvious to the other person listening that we're making these associations in our head. And so they're receiving information through the filters that they listen through, and a whole manner of communication can get missed. All right. So, an example of that um, may be, when I talk a lot about my son, right? And and so, he's. I think I asked him to. I think I may have asked him to take out the trash. Now, this is a very simple example, but this is how it starts. I may have asked him to take out the trash, and that's like a very general thing to do. But understood inside of that was and get all the trash bags from the top floor, get the trash bags from the bottom floor, from the bathroom, the guest bathroom, put those trash cans into the big trash can, then take those trash cans out, take it downstairs, roll it out to the curb. Now, I didn't say all of that, right? And perhaps now my son understands that that's what there is to do. However, when I first said that to him, he just thought, take the trash bags out and take them to the curb, or take them to the bin, not even take them to the curb, take them to the bin. I I needed to be more specific. And when when I went downstairs, and I noticed that the bins were by the house, I was like, well, why didn't you take the bins out to the curb? He said, well, you didn't tell me to do that. That was deleted information as I was speaking. And in my mind, I had generalized taking out the trash to get all the bags from the top, get the bags from the bottom, put them in the big main trash bag, take the trash to the bin, take the bin to the curb. Like, to me, that's taking out the trash. So that's a very simple example of how I deleted a whole bunch of steps, deleted a whole bunch of information, and expected that he would know that, right? And then he says to me, well, how do you, and he's seen me do it a number of times. So I'm sort of like, oh yeah, he knows the drill. And yet, because I wasn't specific enough, how specifically do I take out the trash, right? What specifically is involved in taking out the trash? Because I wasn't specific enough, then he missed some steps. This can happen all the time, in mundane, not mundane, day-to-day relationships, speaking between you and your child, you and your spouse, you and friends. Or this can be more, uh, uh, it could have bigger consequences when you're on a team and you're giving assignments. And sometimes you give the general assignment, but you don't give the details, right? So it's important for us to understand that when we speak to people, even in general conversation, we're always speaking through our own filters, because we're listening through our own filters, we're speaking through our own filters. And in speaking through our own filters, sometimes we're leaving out information. And then of course the person listening is deleting information. And therefore we can have these miscommunications. So what do we do about that? How do we begin um, to get at clarify what people are saying? Well, you just ask. You just ask. You might not assume, like for example, if my son, okay, I'm going to go back to him because, for those of you who don't know, I'm a I'm a single mom, so he's the person I talk to the most. So that's a lot of why I utilize him. Um, and I have, his permission to utilize these stories. And so my son might say something like, "You made me mad." Now that's a very general statement, and remember I talked about cause and effect. So you made me mad. So then for me to really get at the root of what's going on with my son and be like in that conscious parenting way, I might ask, how specifically did I make you mad? And then it'll come out whatever the scenario was that happened, and then we can discuss it, right? Um, or if he's telling me about something and I'm not immediately responding, maybe I'm doing something else, I'm cooking, I'm in the moment, and he says something to me, and then I don't respond. He says, "You must not care about what I'm saying." And then I have to just break attention for a moment and say, that's not the case. I'm, doing something. And then later say, well, how does that mean? How does me not responding right away mean that I don't care about you? And then we can discuss that. Right. So as this is just a simple conversation between me and my son, but you could probably hear in that you can map it onto your own life, because I'm always going to use real life examples. You could map that onto your own life. Like, when have you someone done or said something and you say, "Oh, that must mean this, that must mean you don't care, or that must mean you're mad at me," right? My son called me and I answered with a particular tone of voice, and he asked me, "Are you mad at me?" And I was like, "No, I was just like deep in thought," and I answered a particular way in that particular tone. He made an assumption. We're always making assumptions based on language. So, and he made the assumption not based on what I said, but how I said it. Remember, there's the 93%. So we want to be mindful as we're speaking, and as we're listening to other people speak, that other people are always leaving out information. They're making assumptions about what we say based on their own filters. And we might be making assumptions about what other people are saying based on filters, but with the assumptions that people are making, they'll speak them out. And if you can catch them, if you can, especially if it's an intimate conversation, a personal conversation between you and a friend or a spouse or a child, you could actually resolve conflict much easier when you can catch those deletions. You can catch those generalizations, like, here's one: "You never let me do what I want to do." So that's sort of like a generalization, right? And so when we begin to catch those things, always and never represent generalizations. That means this, or "you make me." Those are cause and effect, and what we call equivalence. Um, that when we catch those, we can actually get to the structure of how people came to believe the thing that they're saying. And that is the bottom line. The work that I do with communication, with neurolinguistic programming specifically, is about the process of our thinking. And a lot of times people will make associations, cause and effect, or equivalence, or generalizations. They'll make these associations, and um, it's not the content that matters. It's what is the process by which they came to believe or think that thing. And when we can listen for these things, and we can discover what is the process by which they came to believe that, then we begin to have a dialogue about how true or false that assumption is. and that belief or value is that's underneath that. And when we can begin to, remember I talk about these filters, and we begin to manipulate a little bit these filters that um, distort our thinking, then we can actually begin to communicate more effectively with each other. And that's the bottom line, because everything is communication, everything happens inside of communication, verbal and nonverbal. That means most conflicts, most things can be created and resolved inside of communication. And people think, there are some people out there that think that communication is not that important, and that learning to communicate better is not that important. And I'm here to tell you that wars get started, marriages end, people fight, people die because of miscommunications. And then relationships begin, new ideas get created, um, you know, love and intimacy is deepened because of effective communication. So that is the work that I teach, tools of how to get at the deeper structure of communication, the communication we have with ourselves, because that's so important, right? It's just as important as the communication we have with others. In fact, the communication that goes on in our heads, our self talk, that's a lot of what drives the communication with others. And when we can learn how to, number one, manipulate our own filters, number two, listen for the filters in others, then um, we can begin to more effectively interact with each other. And that's like on an individual level, on a group level, on a team level, any area of life, you name it, as a physician to patient, as a therapist to patient, as a CEO to team member to manager to whatever. When you begin to really understand the structure of language and how the brain works, and how the language, spoken and unspoken, conscious and unconscious, impacts your day-to-day existence, that's when you become a master at communicating one-to-one and one-to-many. So with that being said, that's what I wanted to talk to you about is this structure of miscommunication and the importance of learning the structure and getting the deeper structure. If this is the work that I do, this is the work that I teach. If you want to know more about that, you can, if you're here on Instagram with me, you can click the link in my bio to take you to my webpage. You can schedule a call with me. You can hit me right in the DMs. If you're here on LinkedIn or Facebook, same thing. You can direct message me, or you can go to the website that you see on the screen and learn more about the trainings. We have one coming in November, January, April, for the NLP, hypnosis, timeline therapy certifications and trainings. CME is now available for my doc colleagues out there. And for my therapist colleagues, it is NBCC certified, National Board of Counseling, certified counselors, certified. So there's continuing education credit available. So reach out to me if you're interested. And otherwise, have a great rest of the week. And I will see you on the next episode. Namaste.